Hello guys, welcome to another video. Here we're going to be talking about one of my chess heroes, and that is the engine. And that seems kind of weird to say, but the engine is someone I've learned chess from more than almost any other single person. So this is a series where we're going to be covering the engine, why it plays so good, how it plays so good, and how we can try to emulate and take away those takeaways and work them into our own games. So this video is going to be a little more advanced, and in order to incorporate this in a successful way, it's my opinion that you really need to be playing longer games. So this is specifically geared towards people who are playing over the board classical, or maybe even online classical or rapid, but certainly not blitz. So in order to demonstrate today's principle, we're going to start with a game, and this is a game I played. But before we start with the game, we're going to start with the game, and we're just going to look at my thought process and the engine's thought process, and how they're different, especially around this subject of reactivity. And what is reactivity? So in chess, our opponent has threats, and we have to deal with the opponent's threats. And failure to deal with the opponent's threats, if those threats are severe enough, results in losing the game immediately. So we always must be aware of our opponent's threats. But sometimes we need to react, and sometimes it's okay to ignore the opponent's threats in order to pursue our own goals. And what the engine does really, really, really well is it knows when to react and when to ignore. And this game is going to be an interesting line into seeing and deciphering when to react and when to ignore in our own games. So I'm playing black against 2400, and this is one of the first games I've played in over a few months of rapid, so it's a nice slow game, trying to get back into rapid. And I played this opening. I really like this opening just because it challenges white. I like challenging the opponent. White is obviously a d4 player. A lot of d4 players are very systematic. They're used to the same pawn structure in every single game. And this is a very unusual pawn structure because there's a pawn on e5 very early on. So most likely they don't know what they're doing here. So our opponent plays knight f3, and this is all preparation. And here, going back to our fundamentals, we want to be active, right? And part of being active is snagging tempos wherever we can and being efficient. So bishop e7 is a tempo. The knight retreats. This knight looks weird, but it has the f4 square, so it's not bad. And from the f4 square, it connects very well on d5. And here, I was thinking between two options, right? There's two obvious moves. Castles is a good move. There's two decisions really for the pawn structure. Let's talk about the pawn structure. You can put the pawn on c5, which scores pretty decently, or you can put the pawn on c6. Now the problem with a move like c5 is that white doesn't need to react to this move, right? And this comes back to our subject of reactivity, right? If white plays d5, I'm feeling real good about what just happened, and black is scoring well. But d5 isn't in white's best interest, because if I take this, I'm just opening up a file towards this weak pawn, and d5 takes away this key square from white's knight that might want to go there. So you can see the engine wants to go e3 or knight f4, keying in on this d5 square and just ignoring this contact and not reacting at all, because there's no dire threat. And you can see humans don't really do this so well. The two top moves are reactions. They're reacting to the threat of taking on d4, even though this is not a threat, it's an equal exchange, which leaves black with an obvious positional deficiency. So c5 is an option, but if our opponent doesn't, play d5, it's not really a good option. So I advise for c6, maybe looking at d5 in the future, but also it just controls this knight, and it offers, my queen some space. So certainly a good move. And my opponent, they're like, no, you don't get to play d5. So that's okay. Remember, we don't want to be reactive. So none of these moves, saying knight b7, a5, queen b6, none of these moves are reactions, right? Taking this pawn or pushing, it loses time. So I don't need to react. There's no threat yet, right? Takes, just strengthens black center. So I just castle, and I develop. And now my opponent makes a threat. So my opponent is threatening, takes. So I need to figure out a way to deal with the threat. There's a couple of ways. There's active defense. I can go after this pawn. There's passive defense. I can just defend. I can move the knight out of the way, but there's not really a great place to move the knight to. On b6, they're just going to play b3, and the knight doesn't do anything. On c5, they're going to kick that knight. That knight is not stable. Knights like stables. He's going to be sent packing, probably back to a6 if I want to keep this defended. So I just put the knight in the center. Right, I have to contend with bishop takes. Obviously, he's trying to discourage me, but there's this rule called the Sam Shankland rule, where when your opponent tries to stop you from doing an idea, it's useful to ask, what if I do it anyway? So I do it anyway. I don't think I'm too worried about this move. And my opponent makes what I think is obviously a mistake. And to prove that this is a mistake, it doesn't require any calculation. You just have to look at how this affects the pieces. Right, this knight is a little weird on h3. But it was always okay because it had the f4 square. Now it has no f4 square. And it has the g5 square, but one, the g5 square can be taken away at any opportunity, and two, from g5, it can't go anywhere. It can't go back to f3, can't go here, can't go here, can't go here. So, and even if it goes here, this pawn is liable to be lost in the future, because it's so deep in black's territory and surrounded by black's pieces. So the knight is really without a purpose now that this pawn is controlling that f4 square, and plus I have the bishop pair. So here I was always feeling quite good. The engine is corroborating that. It's saying black is nearly winning. And here, right, I want to activate my pieces. Moving the bishop doesn't help. There's nowhere to move the bishop that makes it better. Moving this bishop doesn't, maybe I can move it to c5. It doesn't help a lot, it's already developed. Moving this rook, there's nowhere to move it to that makes it better. Same thing with the knight. So obviously, there's this weak pawn. I would like to go queen b6 and hit this pawn. And then play rook d8, opposite their queen. But the problem is it's a little scary. I have to contend with d6, and while this looks okay, right, there's no rook d8 because I take twice, I was still a little nervous about this, right? The knight can come in, and it looks a little bit sketchy. So I didn't necessarily want to go for this when there was a simpler option. So my idea is queen b6, right? And we always have to be resilient and try to make our ideas work. And the problem with queen b6 says I'm worried about d6. So I just trade, right? If we chop away a bunch of times like this, I'm very happy with this position because I have a bishop pair. This knight is essentially dead in the water. It's going to be very hard to get this knight back in the game, and I have huge center control, making it hard for this bishop. So black is doing extraordinarily well here. I would be very happy with that. And if they take with a pawn, well, now I can go queen b6, and there's no d6. So that's what I do. I go queen b3. So I could take here. I could go bishop c5 here. There's some options. I decided to take. I was a little afraid of them taking me, and then after takes, this b5 square is a little loose. I have to watch over it a little bit, and maybe even knight a4 targeting this pawn could happen. So I don't want to deal with that deficiency. It does open up the rook, but they're not coordinating with the rook, right? If they were able to play like knight b6, it would be different. But knight b6 is hard to get in. So I do have to watch out for knight a4, knight b6. So I place a restriction on my opponent. I want to make it so that they can't play knight a4. So I attack this pawn again, making it require defense. And here I play a move bishop c5. And my idea with bishop c5 is these pieces on the king side are contained, right? This knight it can go here, but it might not be great. And the bishop is certainly not great. And I was like, well, what if they go f3 and knight f2? Then they can free the bishop, they can free the knight. And I was like, I don't want to deal with that. So my idea with bishop c5 is, well, now they can't ever play f2. And if they really, really wanted to play f2, like they can't even play king h1, because it doesn't really help. They still can't get the knight there because it's not defended. So I was like, okay, this makes it hard for them to activate these pieces. I do need to watch out for this idea, but I do have a nice square and throwing a threat. And plus I can also go here, like, should this occur. But I do need to be careful because of knight b6. So my opponent plays e3. And here, again, I want to watch over knight a4. Knight a4 is showing up in all these lines. It's the main idea, so I'm just trying to watch over knight a4. I play a6. They play knight g5. And here I can see that they're trying to go here. So I don't want to play h6 because that's just going to encourage them to go where they want to go. I want to round my king up so that it can round up this pawn. Okay, they're trying to attack this pawn. I'm trying to discourage knight e6. They're attacking my bishop. Okay, I just defend my bishop. d6. I have to retreat. But now this knight is stuck, right? d6 is not without its drawbacks. The knight is stuck. Cannot go to e6 anymore. This knight is controlled. It can go to d5, so that's what they're gonna try to do probably. So I kick the knight. I kick this knight and I stop bishop c4, so I'm trying to control the pieces. Okay. Here, Engine comes up with this idea. We'll talk about it later. And we can skip. No, wait. This is what happened. So I played passively, just trying to win this pawn. And he plays this b4 move, trying to get my rook to be undefended so that he can take b5. That's fine. And here, after knight takes b5 and rook d7, it's obvious that I'm going to win. yeah, there's not much to say here. I would say, I would try to go forward if I were him, try to throw this punch. He chooses to go back and trades, and now we're left with this knight just being awful. So I want to go rook here, but I can't because it's hit twice, so I just defend the pawn first. So he's trying to go make the knight better. Even on d2 though, it's not very good. So we're tying down the white pieces, generating a threat. This generates another threat. Like should the threat is knight takes e3, and how that works is, I don't know, some move. Knight takes e3. Wait. Takes. Because yeah, I'm just removing the defender. I'm putting this knight in a pin so that it can't recapture, and then removing the defender. So that's what happens. He walks into knight e3, and he checks me a bunch of times, and he takes my bishop, and I take his rook. I had a choice to choose taking the bishop or the rook, and I obviously took the one with more value. And he's just losing here. Even if he defends, I can even just take this immediately, and I'm sure it's winning. But there's no need to do that. I can just promote my pawn. Cool. So let's talk about what the engine thought about my game. So the engine is like, I didn't blunder, so that's something, but I had a bunch of mistakes. And let's see what the mistakes are organized around. Hopefully you guys can maybe have drawn some conclusions on what you think. So here I'm doing very well. And I'm playing basically all the top moves up until this point. I played perfectly. And here I played bishop c5. And I'm responding to a threat that I perceive, which is this threat or this threat. And it says the reason this is bad is what I described. I have to be worried about this move, knight a4 and then knight b6. Like, should I move bishop d6? They can go knight b6, and it's a little unpleasant. There's this pin operating. So I, kind of violated the fake activity rule of instability. The bishop's not stable there. What is the best move? The best move is h6. And in order to understand this, we need to talk about passive defense and active defense. Now, like I said, in chess, we want to be active, but we don't always get to be active. Sometimes our opponent has threats. If we can, our ideal world is we ignore our opponent's threats, we do what we want. But let's say our opponent has a threat. We have to respect it. So our priority is to address the threat in the most active way. We want to not be passive. And the reason for that is because if I defend passively and my opponent is generating multiple threats at a time, usually I'm not going to be able to cope with those multiple threats at a time. So if my opponent is able to combine ideas or threats, that is going to usually break passive defense. But if I'm defending in an active way, then oftentimes my opponent has to take a timeout from their attack to cope with threats that I'm giving to my opponent. And this allows me to defend a little bit better. So our preference is for active defense, but h6 is not an active defense sort of move. It's very passive, and it's very kind of single purpose, right? There's only one purpose, and it's to stop the knight going to g5. So why do we want to play a passive move when we just talked about how we want to be active, we want to be active, we want to be active? And the reason is, and has to do with optionality. When your opponent has one option, if you take away the only good option, your opponent now has 0 options. And that's huge. Now, if your opponent has 10 options, taking one option away isn't going to do anything, right? It's just wasting a move. Let's look at this knight and decide what type of piece it is. Is it a piece with 10 options, or is it a piece with 1 option? So it can't go here. We've already established that. It might be able to go to g1 and then maybe to d2, but even on d2, one that takes 1, 2, 3, 4 moves, and 2, even on d2, it still can't move forward. So it's not even good on d2. It can't go to f4, can't really feasibly go to g1 and be useful. And let's look at f3. So this is what I was worried about, and this is the reason I played bishop c5. But let's say I play h6, and let's say my opponent plays f3, the move I was worried about. Here, I could take, but there's one move that's much better than all the rest, and that move is the move that deals with the opponent's knight. e3, no knight f2 ever, and it's clear that this knight is just, I mean, this knight is in a world of hurt, right? And you can't even take this pawn. The Socrates is saying rook d3, but this doesn't threaten anything, because if you take, I'm going to pin you, and then I might even win this rook, or pile up on this like this. So this move that I was worried about, in short, it wasn't really a threat because it didn't solve the problem that I thought it solved. So the engine doesn't react to it. But the engine does react to knight g5. And it reacts because this knight only has one option. And the only option it has is to try to dive into e6 and give itself away for this good bishop. So let's go down. Here again, the engine is screaming for h6. Again, there's only one option for this knight. So I don't play h6. I'm trying to play active. I'm trying to stop, knight a4 I'm worried about. And here, knight g5. So let's say knight g5 is the only move that holds the balance. Knight g5. Let's say I go rook here. It likes. Knight e6. Saying I need to take. It's saying that I need to trade. Let's say I play a move like king e7, trying to round up this pawn. Let's just see how this works out. Rook a5. And there's this nasty pin, and I can't play b6 because this drops, and I can't move my bishop because this drops. Yeah, that's pretty nasty. But that's only possible because this pawn moved, right? If the opponent goes rook a5 here, this pawn is blocking the rook's activity. So this knight is necessary to jump in here, give itself away for this useful, good bishop that's able to operate on this important side of the board, and open up lines for white's pieces. So that's why the engine so deeply wants this h6 move. So here, I eventually do run into knight g5. And I play well, and my opponent messes up here. They need to realize that this knight is the source of all their issues, and they don't. They play this move, d6, which forever surrenders the idea that this knight is ever going to do anything useful, because now they no longer have knight e6, and they can't give this knight, trade this knight off. So that they have to play bishop f1. I was threatening to win the knight. And from here, yeah, it's saying that I can do other things. But here, it's obvious that I'm going to win. And, I go on and win in pretty convincing fashion. So let's go back to this idea, because this is the main idea of the video. When our opponent has an idea or a threat that we're worried about, and we're wondering, should we stop this? Ask the question, can we stop this in an active way? And if you can stop it in an active way, go for it. 99% of the time, that's going to be the right answer. If you can stop it in a passive way, think carefully, right? How many ideas does the opponent have? If they have many ideas, stopping it is likely to not be very effective. If they only have one idea, then stopping it is effective. And that doesn't relate to the whole board, right? This position, white has many ideas, right? White has an idea of knight a4, maybe they have rook a5 idea that we looked at, maybe this bishop f1 idea. But how many ideas do they have? One, none of these ideas are dangerous immediately, right? So none of those ideas provide immediate danger to me. So, it's good that I consider them, and I know I'm aware of them, and I'm not going to get hurt by them. But this knight only has one idea, right? And eventually, white is going to have to deal with this knight. So if I take away the one idea that this knight has, it doesn't matter that there's other ideas in the position, because for the rest of the time, this knight will only have one idea, and if I take it away, that will become apparent soon enough. I hope you guys took something away from that video and learned something. Thank you.